What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of our MintCast podcast here at MintPress News. I am your host, Manar Adli. I'm the founder and director of MintPress News. Now, as important as the war of missiles and guns are for Israel, is the propaganda war for Western hearts and minds. And to that end, the Israeli government has increased its budget for Hasbara, foreign public relations, by more than 2,000%. The foreign ministry alone is slated to spend over $150 million this year on propaganda and public relations. So where does all of this money go? Platforms such as Google, that's where they go. Google is making gigantic profits airing Israeli propaganda to Europeans in searches and on YouTube. Now, Google is a willing participant in the slaughter and famine, and as a close partner of Israel, having spent tens of billions propping up the faltering Israeli economy. Joining me today to discuss the PR war is our resident propaganda expert and senior staff writer here at MintPress News, Alan MacLeod. Alan has recently published investigations on MintPress News studying the Israeli propaganda drive on YouTube and on the close links between Google and the state of Israel. Welcome back, Alan.
It's great to be back with you, Minar.
Well, I'm always excited to speak with you, Alan, because our work together has always helped expose the way in which propaganda is formulated and spread out across these big tech platforms and broadcasted to the world. Your recent investigation found that the Israeli Foreign Ministry has spent millions targeting Europeans with slick ad campaigns on Google platforms. Let's actually watch one of these videos now, and I want to get your reaction.
Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. I want to assure the civilized world, we will not let the world's most dangerous regime get the world's most dangerous weapons. The increasing range of Iran's ballistic missiles would bring that nuclear nightmare to the cities of Europe and eventually to America. Remember, Iran calls Israel the small Satan. It calls America the great Satan. Never again is now. Today, Israel has shown that we have learned the lessons of history. When enemies vow to destroy you, believe them. When enemies build weapons of mass death, stop them. As the Bible teaches us, when someone comes to kill you, rise and act first.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack in this one. I mean, we are going from talking about Iran. Of course, that's Netanyahu's voice there that we heard, but we're going from Iran is on its way to building 9 atomic bombs to we have to stop Iran from building a bomb. And I just love that he ends with citing the Bible. So let's get your reaction to this, Alan.
Yeah, as you said, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel himself, which really shows the importance of this propaganda operation for the Israeli government, that they would enlist the Prime Minister of Israel himself to appear in these ads. That it really shows you just the sort of resources that are being targeted towards what Netanyahu, in his own words, rather racistly called the civilized world in that clip we just saw, as if Israel, that's the message, that Israel is basically the entity which is standing between the civilized world of Europe and the United States and the barbarous world of Iran, which is trying to develop a nuclear weapon in order to destroy itself. Now, as you said, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, their budget for PR and Hasbara, which is what they call PR in Israel, has grown to over $150 million, which is well over 2,000% raise from last year. And as we saw, the content of what they put out is basically that Iran represents a huge threat, and it's all about justifying Israel's actions to a Western audience. Now, in the past few weeks alone, my investigation found that the Israeli government have managed to reach at least 45 million Europeans on YouTube alone. And that's just one platform and one ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that doesn't include Google, Google ads themselves, ads on Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram, TikTok, whatever. And it doesn't account for the myriad of pro-Israel organizations, which basically pump out the same stuff. Now, you can also tell that this is a highly inorganic campaign, because if you go to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs' own YouTube channel, they also have other ads or videos that they do not promote. And those ones receive only tens of views per day rather than hundreds of thousands, or in fact, millions in some cases. So we're really living through just the most enormous propaganda campaign that we can really envisage, the scale of which really beggars belief. And that's one reason that really piqued my interest in this. I was in Europe recently, and I was just bombarded with these Israeli government ads every time I tried to watch a YouTube clip. And they were even trying to reach me, which I found pretty ironic. So yeah, this is going on. There is a battle for hearts and minds, which is absolutely as important to the Israeli government as the battle against Iran and other neighbors of Israel.
Well, it's so interesting that they're spending so much money on these propaganda campaign ads to, pull at the heartstrings of people across Europe, to get them to support Israel's endless war machine against Iran and its genocide in Gaza. Of course, we all know that the war in Iran the Israel's war against Iran is a distraction from what Israel is committing, genocide in Gaza. But the truth on the ground actually says something completely different. I mean, people in general, I would say humanity in general, are with the Palestinian people and are opposed to an expanded US-backed Israeli war against Iran. Is that correct?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, Israel is trying to target European countries in this operation, but the studies that are coming out of Europe show that the people of Europe they absolutely despise what Israel is doing. So, for example, a new study from British pollster YouGov actually found that only 16% of Western European publics hold a favorable opinion of Israel, compared to more than 66% expressing an unfavorable view. In fact, more than 10 times as many Europeans have a very unfavorable view of Israel, 39.7%, as hold a very favorable one, which is 3.5%. There was a recent poll in the United Kingdom that showed that 57% of the country want the UK to stop selling arms to Israel, and that 82% of the public think that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, and only 6% of the British public said no, they're not. This is pretty interesting because this poll shows that even bastions of pro-Israel support like Germany, when you actually look at what the public think, it's really not the case that the Germans are lining up to support Israel. Again, what we see there is that only 4% of respondents in Germany have a highly positive opinion of Israel, compared to 2/3 of the population who hold unfavorable views. So what's really going on right now is that Israel is really bombarding us with this propaganda, but they're doing that precisely because the public is turning against them. This is really an existential problem for Israel, because it drives its legitimacy and its support ultimately, and its safety and security from Western Europe and from the United States, which continually provide economic benefits for Israel, help it economically, politically, and militarily. Because without support of Western Europe and the United States, this genocide simply couldn't go on for even a couple of weeks longer.
Well, and I want to unpack because we have another video that we're going to watch, and we're going to also get your reaction and my reaction from this video. But before we get into that, I want to unpack the other aspect of this video, which is all of these accusations about nuclear weapons made against Iran. by Bibi Netanyahu himself, who has been making these accusations against Iran since the 1980s. But in fact, Iran has released a fatwa, which is an Islamic ruling that it is forbidden to create any sort of nuclear weapons. That it's not good for Iran. And so, talk to us more about this propaganda and this kind of witch hunt against Iran and this red herring of nuclear weapons.
Well, you said it there. The government of Iran has been stridently against nuclear weapons ever since the Islamic Revolution. And yet, in the past few weeks and months, we've seen the public start to turn on that position and try to put pressure on the government to develop a nuclear weapon. Even some of the more secular, liberal, more pro-Western elements within Iran are now starting to heavily criticize the Ayatollah's decision not to pursue nuclear weapons. And the whole thing is bizarre and ridiculous on its face because, of course, there is one country in the Middle East, or more accurately, as we should call it, West Asia, that does have nuclear weapons, and that is Israel. It has, on the lowest count, around 80 nuclear weapons, and some people, credible sources, suggest that it might be up to 200 or even slightly more than 200 nuclear weapons that they possess. So we've got a situation where the only nuclear-armed country in West Asia is trying to scaremonger the world about a country which does not possess nuclear weapons, that they might one day in the future have nuclear weapons and then use them against a nuclear-armed state. The whole thing is absurd on its face, and every time Benjamin Netanyahu goes to the United Nations with a big caricature, like cartoon picture of a bomb and says Iran is weeks or months away from developing nuclear weapons. We've heard it all before. We heard it in the 2010s, the 2000s, the 1990s. You can go back to the 1980s and see Israeli officials warning that the Iranians are so close to developing a nuclear weapon and we have to step in. The fact of the matter is that this is a justification for what they've been wanting to do for decades, which is strike at Iran, because Iran poses a threat to Israel. It's not an aggressive or a military threat, but it's the threat of a country that's not following orders. There aren't that many countries in Western Asia that are actually actively trying to oppose Israel. Frankly, you can count them on the hands of your fingers on one hand. Unfortunately, that's the case. Too many of these governments are actually tacitly, or sometimes not even so tacitly, supporting what Israel is doing. And so that's really the whole bizarre propaganda, bizarre world we live in, where, as I said, a nuclear-armed country that is threatening and bombing 6 countries simultaneously is trying to scaremonger the world into believing that Iran, a country without nuclear weapons, is somehow a threat to the world, when it's actually exactly the opposite going on.
Absolutely. And we know that this is all a red herring to fearmonger about Iran, but in reality, Iran poses an economic threat to Israel and to other countries in the region for its resources. It's a very self-sufficient country, but most importantly, it's an anti-imperialist country, and it's supporting resistance movements in the region that are standing up and pushing back against U.S. and Israeli imperialism. And that's why Iran truly does pose a threat to Israel. But of course, the United States knows that it probably can't win a war with Iran. Even Israel knows that a war with Iran wouldn't even work without the backing and support of the United States. But the United States has showed great restraint. It's showed that it doesn't want this war, despite its theatrical missile strikes against these empty nuclear sites inside of Iran. But we have to wait and see, because, Netanyahu just in the last month has met with the Trump administration to what we believe is pushing to convince the Trump administration to push for more war with Iran. But clearly they're not giving up. So we watched a ceasefire, so-called ceasefire, but Israel is clearly paying a lot of money for this Hasbara YouTube propaganda. And I just want to remind everybody too, like MintPress has been targeted by Google through Google Owl, and we've been suppressed, we've been delisted and demoted, blacklisted within search results while Google is now actively taking this money from the state of Israel, from an apartheid state that is engaging in genocide, and pushing that Hasbara propaganda to push for war with Iran, which shows what is acceptable coverage on these big tech platforms, anti-war journalism that holds the elite accountable, the military class accountable, or war propaganda. Clearly, war propaganda is okay as long as it reinforces the military-industrial complex. So we're going to watch this next video that we've prepared, and we'll get your reaction to that, Alan, as well.
Imagine this. You're holding your newborn in a hospital room. Then the air raid sirens go off. Iran fires ballistic missiles at hospitals, at innocent Israelis, patients, doctors, newborn babies, deliberately targeted. While Iran aims at families and children, Israel responds with precision, striking military sites. This is not a war of choice. Those who target civilians and hospitals become the target.
To me, it sounds like Israel suffers from a syndrome called projection syndrome that they would call in like psychiatry wards. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we are invited to think of ourselves as the Israeli mother. We're not invited to think of ourselves as the Palestinian mother who's being forced to give birth in their own home without anesthetic or without any medical supervision, because most of the hospitals in Gaza have been bombed out. And so many of the claims in this video are really highly questionable. I mean, in what's now called the 12-day war in the West, around 935 Iranians were killed compared to 28 Israelis. So the idea that Israel is really being precise with its strikes while Iran bombs people indiscriminately doesn't really seem to be borne out by those figures. In fact, since October 2023, Israel has deliberately and repeatedly struck at hospitals in Palestine. The World Health Organization, for example, has documented 697 separate Israeli strikes on medical facilities. 94% of Gaza's hospitals have been destroyed or damaged, and more than 1,400 medical personnel in Gaza have been killed since October 2023, some of them in extremely gruesome ways. For example, Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was head of orthopedics at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, was reportedly raped to death by Israeli prison guards. According to UNICEF, more than 50,000 Palestinian children have been killed or injured since October 2023. And recently we spoke to Wally Massey, an American nurse who served in Gaza. You should go back and watch that interview that we did a few weeks ago. He said to us that the IDF regularly shoots boys in their genitals, specifically to prevent them from reproducing in the future. So despite this, Israel presents itself as like the savior of the Palestinian people in these videos, which is utterly ridiculous. Like, you know, they talk about this is what real aid looks like. We are on a humanitarian mission. But it is really a gross upending of the facts on the ground. And that's really all the Israeli government has. It can't fight on the reality of facts and logic. So it has to invent these worlds where we are suddenly Israeli mothers that are being targeted by Iran. But as we've been intimating before, this is not based in reality. This is propaganda, and we have to call it out for what it is.
And I know we kind of briefly mentioned this about how people on the ground and just humanity in general are standing with the people of Palestine, and they don't want this war with Iran, whether it's Israel or an expanded war by the United States. People are quite exhausted. Do you think any of this propaganda is actually working on anyone specific?
It's difficult to say, really. I mean, they're spending a lot of money, so they must think they're getting some kind of benefit from it, right? And I guess if you're what a lot of Americans call low information voters, it might have some sort of effect. I mean, it's the same reason why Benjamin Netanyahu goes on, a couple of podcast bros podcast and gets lobbed softball questions by them. The whole point is to try to present the narrative in a certain way that's favorable to Israel. I think much more effective, frankly, is all of the Western traditional mainstream media outlets who are continually representing this war, as they call it. It's not a war, it's a genocide, as something that started on October 7th, 2023, and Israel is just responding to. That, I think, is actually the much more effective propaganda, whereby these media outlets that present themselves as bastions of truth, and they're just calling balls and strikes, and they're neutral observers, when they frame things as Hamas slaughter versus Israeli response, I think that actually has a much bigger and deeper effect on Western publics.
Well, and it seems like the very more conservative or right-wing base that would have normally supported Israel are now turning against the state of Israel. But that's not stopping Israel from actually targeting in the United States here MAGA supporters. A lot of MAGA supporters and influencers are turning against Israel. I mean, that's just a fact right now. It's pretty wild to see this whole thing go down, and the tension between these MAGA influencers like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, people that have come out in support of Trump, and now Trump's strongest base is turning against Trump, and they're turning against the state of Israel because they're realizing and recognizing that U.S. support for Israel is harming America, and it's targeting, in fact, this indigenous Christian population inside of Palestine, inside of Lebanon, inside of Syria. They're being attacked and targeted by Israel or U.S.-backed forces in those countries.
Yeah, I mean, Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, but now Israel is actually kind of pushing back by funding trips for young MAGA supporters to get them to support Israel and use their platforms to promote Israeli propaganda. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for decades, the real bastion of support for Israel in the United States has not actually been the Jewish community. In fact, if you look at polls of American Jews, the plurality of young Jews under 40 consider Israel itself to be a racist apartheid state. And when you look at who actually voted for the Muslim leftist pro-Palestine candidate for the Democratic nomination for mayor of New York, Zoran Mandami, you look at, it seems that a majority of Jews in New York actually voted for him rather than Cuomo or someone else, which goes completely against what you'd think if you were just relying on the New York Times or CNN or whomever. The real bastion of support for Israel in the United States has always been conservative Christians. And that's because in their ideology, they want to see the end times being brought about, and that necessitates the rebirth of the state of Israel. It's actually a very anti-Semitic position because in their crazy view of what's going to happen, they actually believe the righteous will ascend to heaven, and that's them, the Christians, and everyone else, including Jewish people, will be sent to hell. So they're actually wishing for Armageddon and the apocalypse, specifically because they want to be God's chosen people and for the rest of them to be cast into the fiery pits of hell. As you were saying, though, MAGA is really split right now. And that is why the state of Israel is really trying very hard to shore up those sorts of lines of support. They've recently announced that 16 MAGA influencers, all young and all with hundreds of thousands of followers on various social media platforms, are going to be brought to Israel for a multi-day trip in the coming weeks, whereby they will be taught about Israel's history and its present, and it will be specifically taught how to counter pro-Palestine narratives online. And the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs has actually set aside money so that at least 500 different influencer trips to Israel will be paid for by the end of the year. And that's not even clear if that's just single influencers or it's actually groups of influencers going over. So we could be seeing thousands of right-wing people in the United States taking trips to Israel and then suddenly parroting Tel Aviv's propaganda lines. So anyone who watches right-wing media, just watch out for that in the coming months, because it's coming.
For sure. And I want to talk more about what's happening inside of Google. I'm not sure how many people would even be surprised right now by the fact that Google is allowing this content, this kind of propaganda paid for by the state of Israel, to be broadcasted on Google and spread to the masses, but few would know just how closely Google materially actually aids Israel in its destruction of Palestine. So this brings me to your next investigation, which is on our website, called Wiz Acquisition Puts Israeli Intelligence in Charge of Your Google Data. How is Google aiding Israel?
Well, I mean, for a start, it's taking huge amounts of money to accept tens of millions of ads directed at European publics, promoting the state of Israel, promoting narratives that explicitly break Google's terms of services. I put this to them in questions, and multiple people at Google said that they would get back to me, and they never did, of course. Google's terms of services specifically say that you cannot justify violence in these ads. But as we've seen, so many of these ads say things like Israel is doing what needs to be done, it's protecting European publics. It's completely ridiculous. And the amount of people that are getting targeted here, I mean, the countries that are specifically being targeted are the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Greece. And I think Greece is a really interesting test case here, because there are multiple ads on the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs YouTube channel that have been up just for a few days that are in Greek only and have got more than 2 million views apiece. Now, the entire world population of people who speak Greek is only about 13 million people. So we're talking about something like close to 20% of all Greek-speaking people have been hit with these ads on YouTube alone. And we're not even talking about other ads on Google, on WhatsApp, Telegram, Instagram, etc. So this is an enormous funneling of resources towards certain publics. And maybe it's not working, because we recently saw a huge protest by the Greek people blocking Israeli ships from docking and disembarking, and having all these Israeli tourists slash refugees come aboard, come into Greece to, potentially cause trouble in Greek eyes. So yeah, it's very interesting what's going on there. But Google itself has been really at the forefront of helping Israel for such a long time. Quite recently, as you said in your question, it bought Wiz, which is a cybersecurity firm, for $32 billion, which raised a lot of eyebrows, because that valuation for a company that almost nobody has heard of seemed outlandish. It's actually 65 times the yearly revenue, not profit, but revenue of this company. And just the amount of tax that this all-cash purchase of Wiz brought to the Israeli government was in the billions. And in fact, it was calculated by Israeli media that this boosted the Israeli economy, its GDP, by 0.6%. So a lot of people who were, watching this were wondering, not so quietly, even quite loudly, they were thinking, is Google actually just trying to shore up the Israeli wartime economy, which is really on its knees? But few who really studied Google's connections to the Israeli government would be that surprised by this. I mean, the former CEO, Eric Schmidt, is known as one of Israel's biggest supporters online and offline. Google's been financially invested in Israel for nearly 20 years. It opened its first offices in Tel Aviv in 2006. Schmidt has met with Netanyahu at least once, and he declared that the decision to partner with Israel was the best decision Google has ever made. Another Google co-founder, Sergey Brin, has been one of the most vehement and vocal supporters of Israel, denouncing even the United Nations as what he called a, quote, transparently anti-Semitic, end quote, organization. He also said that he told Google staff that using words like genocide to describe Israeli actions in Gaza is, and I'm quoting here, deeply offensive to many Jewish people who have suffered actual genocides. So it's very clear from the top down that Google has been one of Israel's most critical partners for many years. And this purchase of Waze is just another chapter in this. Of Wiz. Google has bought a lot of Israeli companies founded by Israeli secret intelligence services like Unit 8200 before. One of them is the mapping app Waze. This cybersecurity company, Wiz, is a little different because this really gets to the heart of our user data. I mean, we trust Google with so much data, and now so much of it is going to be in the hands of a cybersecurity firm, which was founded by and is still staffed by Unit 8200 members, which is Israel's biggest and most controversial spying group. That really raises a lot of questions about whether we can trust Google with our personal data or whether we should be moving off their platforms altogether.
I mean, to me, this seems like a pretty big scandal, the fact that a foreign country has access to all of Americans' data and information, their maps, their text messages. I mean, everything is literally now in the hands of this apartheid regime. And we saw what happened in Lebanon. I mean, we can talk about Google and our information, but look what happened in Lebanon when Israel had access to Bluetooth devices to civilians in South Lebanon. They say that was targeting Hezbollah fighters, right? But Israel was able to hack and get into all of these Bluetooth devices and injure and kill, and with these devices exploding, targeting so many civilians. I know that this is like, we're talking about data and we're talking about emails, but like the fact that Israel has access to people's also Bluetooth devices and then also their email devices, email platforms here in the United States, we see Israel doing sabotage in foreign countries and we think, oh, that's happening over there, right? We think it's happening over there. But in fact, it's happening here on this microcosmic level that could set us up for future violence. Would you agree with that?
Well, what I'd say is that we don't know for sure if Israel has access to all this data, but we do know that companies that have been founded by Israeli intelligence veterans that remain very close to the Israeli government and have all sorts of connections to the Israeli military and the Israeli intelligence services do have access to this sort of data. And that should really raise the hairs on your head for anyone who cares about privacy, security, national security even. Having these companies of a foreign nation have this amount of data on us really raises a lot of significant questions about what the internet is used for. And frankly, I think a lot of countries should, or at least study the Chinese method of having a great firewall and building these mirrored platforms, these alternative platforms that are domestic and can be controlled as a matter of national security. And a lot of countries are starting to wake up to the reality that Silicon Valley companies have all sorts of connections to the United States government to the point where sometimes it's very hard to see where one ends and the other one begins. So yeah, I mean, to your question, this era we're living in is nightmarish and dysfunctional and dystopian in so many ways. But a lot of people who are not paying very close attention to what's actually going on in terms of the battle for their eyeballs, the battle of what they want to think and how to think. They don't even realize this is going on. And this is one of the key fights of the 21st century that we've all got to be involved in. Absolutely.
I mean, to me, it just seems so obvious that all of this is a national security threat. And obviously, like, yes, it's not in the hands of Israel, it's in the hands of Israeli spies, but these are Israeli spies that have, that work for the state of Israel. They say they're former Israeli spies, but I don't know, Alan. I think once you're a spy, you will always be a spy, and you're going to be dedicated to the state of Israel. And I feel like this is like an infiltration of these Israeli spies within big tech to kind of keep the U.S. hooked on to Israel. So there's kind of no way out of this relationship because, to think about having these Israeli spies having access to all of this data, I mean, not only could they set things up for maybe violence in the future, but it could also set people up for sabotage using their secrets against them if they were to want to stand up to any sort of like U.S. foreign policy issue or Israeli issue. I mean, we've seen this in the past with like politicians where, what they've done in the bedroom is being used against them. And so I don't know. That's where my thought process goes when I think about this. It really, really is scary to think. And then now we have the rise of AI, and AI is pulling information and our data from probably even within our email conversations and our chat conversations to learn more about us. To me, it's frightening. And so who knows what the world is going to look like for our children, and our grandchildren. I have 2 boys, so I think about these things often. And like when we look at all of these big tech platforms and even the use of AI, not to go off subject here, but a lot of the people that are engaged in building AI and the infrastructure behind it are also very pro-Israel. I mean, that's just the truth. So, and they're tied to these big tech companies. And so that really, and it's becoming normalized within college campuses. It's being normalized in our devices, in our emails, in our WhatsApp conversations. AI is like everywhere. And so all of these things intertwined really is setting us up for who knows what in the near future. But I want to talk more about these Israeli spies, because these Israeli spies are coming from Israel's most elite spying military unit, which is Unit 8200. These people were behind building Pegasus and planting that in the devices of people like Jamal Khashoggi, which helped Saudi Arabia basically assassinate him and kill him. And chop him up into pieces. I mean, how horrific is that? I mean, talk about having access to our data and setting us up for some sort of violence or some sort of sabotage. This is a perfect example of that. And now these spies within Unit 8200 are working inside Google. And this is something that you've been tracking. You've been doing research and investigations and studies for MintPress News. We've published these investigations on our website. Of course, everybody can check them out. But please do elaborate on Unit 8200 within big tech.
Yeah, sure. So that's why it's so worrying to see so many of these Unit 8200 alumni getting jobs in prestigious places in big tech like Google, like TikTok, like Facebook, etc. Unit 8200 is really the centerpiece of the Israeli surveillance state. It, for Palestinians, is really just a ubiquitous force in their lives. Palestinians every day are watched by facial recognition cameras, which track their every move. They are monitored. All the texts and messages they send, all the calls they make are recorded and put into gigantic Unit 8200 databases. In fact, we know now that Project Lavender has built gigantic databases of all Gazans and assigned them scores of between 1 and 100, 100 being very likely to be in Hamas and 1 being very unlikely to be in Hamas. This includes women and children. And if your number that is assigned to you rises above a certain level, you are automatically put on a list to be targeted. And that is why the onslaught against Gaza was so violent and so fulsome for weeks and weeks, because Unit 8200, using AI, was able to get around this human targeting bottleneck, is what they called it, because this AI program just kept feeding them tens of thousands of different targets to keep hitting day after day after day. And they only stopped using it when the amount of people in Gaza who had just been bombed out of their homes and were just living on the streets or in makeshift refugee camps became so big that their data suddenly just couldn't be used anymore. Unit 8200 is also behind the pager attack on Lebanon, which in Israel was described as a great success, but was also described as almost universally as an act of international terrorism, including by Leon Panetta, the former chief of the CIA, who's hardly some sort of pro-Palestine dove. And you don't end up in Unit 8200 by accident. It's often called Israel's Harvard. It is the most elite unit in the Israeli military. And parents, rich parents, spend fortunes for their teenage children on STEM lessons to try to make it more likely that they will achieve the scores good enough to be accepted into Unit 8200, because they know that a future in Israel or even the world's burgeoning tech center will await if you have this thing of Unit A200 on your resume. And that's what happens. Big companies in Silicon Valley like Google actively recruit from Israel, from the Israeli military, and pick people out of Unit 8200 to be parachuted into their organizations. My article, which is called Revealed Former Israeli Spies Working for Top Jobs in Google, Facebook, and Amazon, found that there were at least 99 Unit 8200 veterans working within Google's ranks. And that is very likely to be a serious underestimate, because under Israeli law, it's actually an offense to divulge that you are a part of Unit 8200. So it's only the people who are actively flouting Israeli law by putting that on their resumes that I was able to find. And these people, a lot of them were in very politically sensitive fields in Google's ranks. For example, Gabriel Goidel, he, between 2010 and 2016, became head of learning. He was a commander of Unit 8200. And then at one point, he left Unit 8200 and became head of strategy and operations for Google. So he's one of the highest ranking people at Google who has had this career in Israeli military intelligence, and not even just at the low levels where everyone's a private or anything. This guy is a commander who jumped ship and worked at Google. Another interesting example I found was Ben Bariak, and I do apologize to all of these Israelis for butchering their names, but yeah, until 2011, he was a cyber intelligence officer where he commanded strategic teams of elite forces within Unit 8200. Since 2016, though, he has worked for Google, and between 2018 and 2020, he was actually he was concentrating on tackling what he called controversial content, disinformation, and cybersecurity for Google. And I got to say, what sort of controversial content is a former Israeli spy tracking for Google? We can only speculate, because Google is very tight-lipped about this stuff. But I think perhaps we don't need to have a PhD in maths to put 2 and 2 together here and understand that something very fishy is going on, something that we all have to be looking at, because this affects everyone. Everyone uses Google, whether they like it or not. This affects all of us, all around the world. So we should all be paying attention to this.
And Alan, you don't need to apologize for butchering these Israeli spies' names. They're literally butchering our people. So I don't think that an apology is necessary on that. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to end with talking about Elon Musk's SpaceX, because it's actually related to what we're talking about. And it's not just Google who are waist deep in Israel's wars in the Middle East. It's also Elon Musk's SpaceX. People like to think of Musk as being like this, outsider, rebellious person. But in fact, he's quite close to the Israeli establishment. So if we can, and this also relates to the war against Iran. So we just have 3 minutes left. So can you elaborate on Musk's meddling in Iran that is benefiting Israel?
Well, check out the article I wrote, Starlink's Secret War, How Musk is Powering a Covert Campaign Against Iran. Musk obviously presents himself as this outsider, but his career and his companies are really birthed by the CIA. SpaceX itself, which controls Starlink, wouldn't have gotten off the ground without huge help from Mike Griffin, who is the head of InQtel, the CIA's venture capitalist wing. Mike Griffin went to the CIA and pounded his fist on the table and said, Elon Musk is the future Henry Ford of the rocket industry. And he has held Musk's hand every inch of the way throughout his development as a big tech entrepreneur. In fact, so close to Musk is he that Elon Musk named his first child Griffin Musk after Mike Griffin. And he named his that child he had, which was like X12AE or whatever. That was named after a CIA bomber as well. And Griffin has constantly plied Musk with government contracts for years. In terms of Iran, during what's called the 12-day war, Iran tried to shut down the internet and close it off for national security reasons. And Musk announced that he had actually managed in the past couple of years to smuggle or help smuggle 20,000 Starlink satellite internet dishes into Iran, which was helping Iranian activists and Iranian agents helping Western nations communicate and coordinate for any sort of regime change attempt on Iran. This is not the first time Musk has actually been used in this method. He's also very much helped the US war effort in Ukraine as well. They say Ukrainian forces can't even fire many of their high-tech weapons without Starlink. So Musk is absolutely at the heart of the military-industrial complex, whether he likes to present himself that way or not.
And we'll do another segment on Elon Musk and SpaceX. We'll elaborate more, but clearly, on the outside, when we were being told like, oh, SpaceX is helping activists on the ground, inside of Iran, it sounds like really nice, like cool. We're helping people stand up to their government, to their authoritarian government. But in reality, the United States has been engaging in sabotage inside of Iran, and I don't think Iranians need this white savior to send them satellites so that they can overthrow their government. That is what the US and Israel want. That's part of their agenda. It's been their agenda for quite some time. And it's not some thing that we can look at from a positive perspective and say, wow, look what Elon Musk is doing. I just don't see that as anything sort of positive. It just benefits the capitalists. It benefits the regime change architects that want to see Iran fall. Anyways, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to continue this conversation next time. We'll expand more on Elon Musk and perhaps talk more about this whole Jeffrey Epstein scandal. I was hoping to do a podcast about that, but we will do it in a couple of weeks when I'm back from my trip. So thank you so much, Alan. And everybody can check those investigations out on our website.